Castlevania is one of my favorite animated Netflix shows. And since it's October, I think it's the perfect time to make one of the best characters. Of course, I'm doing this with the most random combination of tools: resin, yarn, fabric, and a lot of glue. If you watched my last video, then you already saw how I sculpted Dracula's head in Blender, but off camera I personalized modifications like his hands. As each piece was finalized, I printed them out on my Ender 3 Pro. Nope, you're not seeing double. Those extra body pieces are for the next project. I bet you can already tell who they're for. Now don't get me wrong, I typically take my time and carefully deal with the imperfections and make everything as smooth as possible on a filament printed body like this one. But this time I won't be doing as much work on the body cleanup, and there's a perfect explanation as to why. It became pretty obvious pretty fast that once I make his clothes, no one will ever see his body again. So it didn't make sense to spend hours and hours just sanding when it won't be noticed at all. I know, this bothered my perfectionist brain for a while too, but I also have a lot of other projects in the pipeline, so it was just best for me to save time whenever I could. By the same theory, that means I didn't technically have to paint the body the right color, but there's no way I'm letting myself go that far. I'm not completely crazy. So at this point I kinda made the mistake of using this photo as a reference when I really should have been using these to match his skin. You'll see here that I just mixed up a light gray when in reality his skin is more like a desaturated skin tone. Fortunately, I caught this mistake before I went too far and fixed everything off camera. Once everything is good and dry, I can string most of the body together. At this point the arms weren't quite ready yet, but we'll add those on later. Now that's out of the way, we can start with the fun stuff, his face. It's hard to tell at this stage, but his face has a lot of details which I was able to perfectly capture with the power of Resin 3D printing. To actually see the detail though, we need to add several layers of watered down paint. Now that his skin is opaque and buttery smooth, I can paint on his facial hair. I plan on covering this with actual hair later, so this is pretty much just the background layer. While that dries, I'm going to take care of those red eyes. That was a rhyme, I did not do that on purpose. For this, I'm going to be using the eye bases I also printed out of resin and some red and black gouache paint. These are probably the tiniest eyes I've done so far, so it kind of goes without saying that most of this had to be done without breathing and off camera. The style of Castlevania eyes are pretty close to my own, so this part was pretty much business as usual. Gouache paint is really easy to work with, but unfortunately it's not waterproof, so I had to do heavy layers of MSC before coating them in some UV resin. Back to the face, I'm blushing in all those important crevices and adding some dimension to his cheekbones with the chalk pastel color I mixed up. It's basically a mix of red, brown, white, and black. It never shows up well on camera, but I do dab a bit of blue on those inner eye corners. This is a trick I picked up from looking at a whole bunch of face-ups on Instagram. And his eyebrows magically appear here, and I've also added some very subtle blushing to his nose and cheeks. With a bit more work done, like his eyelashes and the final layer of MSC, I can now glue his eyes in place. Obviously for his clothes, I'm grabbing whatever black and red fabric I have, and of course stealing some from my mom. At first glance, his clothes look a bit overwhelming, but I just broke it down into layers. Pants, undervest, coat, and then his cape. The pants are super easy and we've seen this pattern done a million times at this point, so once they're hemmed, I just sew the two sides together. I don't want them too loose or thick, so I'm using a thin black, slightly stretchy fabric. sewing his undervest pretty much like a shirt, leaving an opening in the back so that the closure is covered up with the jacket layer. This I'm just making out of black cotton. I traced the panels I need, leaving plenty of room for seam allowance and potential mistakes. As you can see, white watercolor pencils aren't just great for doll faces, but they're also super helpful for sewing too. To help make sure I don't mix anything up, I label the front with the F and the back panels with the letter B. Taking the pieces through my sewing machine, I hem the edges and sew the front panels together. From there, it's the same as sewing a shirt like I mentioned before, only without the sleeves. When it's pretty much put together, except for the collar, I bring back the white pencil and sketch on those gray details. Following those guidelines, I use the gray paint I mixed up to paint everything in. Technically, you could also use iron-on vinyl, which I'll actually be using a little bit later, but I didn't have any in this light of a gray. I do about 2 or 3 layers just to make sure that the color is completely opaque over that black. The paint method works great, but if the color isn't built up enough, it'll just look, well, like painted fabric. I'm going to put that aside to dry for now and work on the jacket. This part is pretty much the same as the vest. I'm only making it a bit bigger, extending the tails, and making it so the opening is, of course, in the front. And also adding sleeves. And finally, a bit of red comes in for the lining of the collar. I also slap a bit of wire in there on the inside so I can bend it later. Once everything is sewn together, this is how it looks. I'm not quite done though, because we need to make those little flappy things and the sleeve flare cup thingies. I know, not the official name of those, but close enough. I draw on the patterns in Procreate and export them into the Cricut app to cut them on, you guessed it, my mom's Cricut. And here is where the red iron-on vinyl comes into play. The details pretty much become one with the fabric as soon as you burn it into submission with a little heat. For the sleeve things, before I put on the red details, I put on a layer of black so the whole thing won't fray. And this is how that came out. This part was extremely satisfying to see done. The last piece of clothing is his cloak. This part is super easy, it's just a really long shape that's been tapered toward the top. Now to tackle those details. You may have noticed poor Dracula has been bald up until this point, so let's go take care of his hair. Off camera, I added some brushed out yarn to his facial hair to add some depth. You probably already noticed this throughout the earlier parts of the video, but a while back I used a test head to make the wig cap. And just like with every project, I do this by using mesh fabric and wood glue. A week later, I cut the wig to roughly the shape of his hairline and then go crazy adding a lot of yarn hair. If you're new here and wondering how I made this stuff so silky smooth, then make sure you check out my Zoe video where I explain all the steps. This is a very long and messy process, so hopefully you're all proud of me for capturing more of it on camera this time. Yarn hair is really easy to style, but the strands are so light they fly everywhere. This is how it's looking with all the hair glued on, but Dracula has a slightly wavy hair texture, so we need to fix whatever's going on here. To do that, I'm braiding his hair into some loose braids and once again using the power of an iron to heat the hair into submission. In this shot, it looks a hot mess, but we don't need to make it look too perfect now because we still have to take the wig off and put it on the correct head. All I have to do is take care of the tiny details, and with that, Dracula is done. Hope you all enjoyed watching the process. Keep an eye out on the community tab to see when the next 2 videos drop. And like always, thank you for watching, stay sweet, and I'll see you next time.